So tonight we have a couple of announcements, and we have Cory and Anne here to speak about how to conduct a heuristic evaluation. I am super excited. I've had a little sneak peek of this talk, and it's awesome. So I think you're going to learn a lot, and you're really going to enjoy it. I'd like to point out that we are on all your, well, maybe not all, but many of your favorite social media channels. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. We have a professional and a personal account. And YouTube, Facebook, Insta, all of the things. We like to see your highlights from tonight, Twitter too. So if you use the hashtag UXRS for UX research and strategy, we'll be sure to retweet and like your posts. So share your thoughts and your photos and your feedback from tonight's event. We'd love that. Next month, let's talk about next month. This is going to be pretty cool. We have the one and only Erica Hall, and she is the author of Just Enough Research. So she's going to talk, and this is a partner event with Service Design Network in Dallas. So she's going to talk about getting UX and service design research right at scale. So it's a combo event. It's going to be packed full of a lot of information, and Erica Hall is totally awesome. So tickets are available for that now. I think, I can't see the chat right now, but I think Lauren's going to throw the link into the chat, and you'll be able to join. If you haven't got tickets already, go ahead and snatch up a ticket for that event. That's going to be at 12 noon Central Time. So probably a little bit more accommodating for our European folks. So just notice the time difference than what our events normally are. 12 noon on April 13th. Again, we love your feedback. We want to know how we can improve. And so please fill out the post-event survey. We're going to throw that link here in the chat if it's not there already. We'll probably throw it in again later because it makes sense for you to give feedback after the event. But also check your email after the event. We'll have it in there as well. If you're not on mute, please make sure that you mute yourself so we don't interrupt the speakers too. So without further ado, let me introduce a couple of colleagues of mine. Anne Culp and Cory Madaris are UX researchers at the company I work at, which is Fidelity Investments. So I'm going to pass the floor over to them. I think we're going to start off with introductions from Anne. So again, Anne Culp and Cory Madaris, give us a little silent clapping or thumbs up or a warm welcome. Anne, off to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here and present to you about using heuristics to evaluate experiences. Again, I'm Anne Culp, and I'm a principal UX researcher at Fidelity Investments, and I have been involved in UX in some form or fashion for a while now at both software companies and financial services companies. So I'm going to pass it over to Cory, and he's going to kick it off.
All right, thank you, Anne. Hey, everybody, my name is Cory Madaris. I'm a director on the UX research team at Fidelity. Been here about 12 years and currently leading a team whose basically sole focus right now is measuring the quality of what we're calling key experiences across our organization. And we're doing that via heuristic evaluation. So this topic is pretty near and dear to my heart right now. And as we were talking to Jen throughout the last couple of months, and we saw, all of the interest in the topic, we were sort of blown away by it. But I think it does make a lot of sense, as we internally are using the method a lot more than we ever have before, and in a lot different ways than we ever have before. So we were super excited to hear that there's a lot of interest in learning more, and we're hoping that we can be able to provide at least one or two things that you can take away and use in your roles and at your company. So, and then I also wanted just to thank the UXRS crew and Jen especially for giving us the opportunity to talk to you all about how we personally think about heuristic evaluation and how we use it in our day-to-day. And then lastly, just thanks to everybody who's joined. Again, we hope to be able to provide something useful to you, and we hope the hour is entertaining. as well as gives you good food for thought and some tools to use going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share. Hopefully this is going to work okay. All right. All right, how are we looking? Are we seeing a slide or yeah? Okay,
We're seeing a slide, we're good.
Good deal. We struggled a bit with this earlier, so we're off and running. So I wanted to start off by sort of telling a little story. Shortly after my wife and I had our son, we figured out pretty quickly that our first home wasn't really going to work for very long for our family. And about 4 years ago, we found a home that we really loved, and even better, it had just been fully renovated, which was great for us because we're new parents and didn't know what we were doing and didn't want to have to deal with anything else except keeping a little human alive. And the fact that everything was new meant that in theory, problem free as well. So fast forward about 3 years, we are having issues with our plumbing and in our bathtub. So we had a company out to come address the issue. And during that visit, the company informed us that they could also provide a walkthrough and a visual inspection of our sort of entire heating and plumbing system. And we took them up on the offer, and a few days later, an inspector arrived at our door and was ready to go ahead and take a look at our system. So armed with little more than a checklist and his own professional knowledge, the inspector set out to evaluate our whole heating and plumbing system. He started in our kitchen, he worked his way through our bathrooms and moved into the utility closet, sort of inspecting every little nook and cranny in the system along the way. It took him about 30 minutes in total until he had finished up. And as he finished up, he walked back into the kitchen. And at that time I was sort of thinking, well, did we waste our money? Like everything's pretty new here. He's probably going to tell us that everything looks good and he's going to go about it, go on his way and so on and so forth. But instead, he looked at me sympathetically and uttered 6 words that no homeowner ever wants to hear, which was, "I need to show you something." And I thought, what is this? And I followed him back to our utility closet. And what I found that was in a relatively short period of time, 30 minutes or so, he had uncovered a pretty severe issue that needed to be addressed, and it needed to be addressed pretty quickly. So you're probably wondering, how in the world is this relevant? And really the point is that regardless if you're a plumbing and heating professional or a UX professional, knowing what to look for and how to conduct a proper inspection is one of the most powerful and versatile skills that you can have. In UX research, we call this heuristic evaluation. And the great thing is that the required skill set for doing this is something that each one of you likely already has or can attain in a very short period of time. So what we're going to do is talk to you a little bit about that and hopefully provide some input into how. So during the next hour, we're going to do our best to provide the basics. We're going to walk you through sort of what it is, why you would ever do it, when you would want to do it, what you need to be able to do it, and what it actually looks like in practice. So what is heuristic evaluation anyway? Simply stated, it's a technique for evaluating digital experiences using a set of UX rules of thumb. Similar to how the inspector that I just talked about used a sort of set of guidelines to help him determine what to look for and where within our system, within our heating and plumbing system, UX professionals can use a set of UX heuristics to evaluate different parts of customer journeys. What we're really looking for there are violations of these rules, which can impact somebody's ability to complete the tasks that they came to your site or to your app to do. And the extent to which the user's ability to complete the task is hindered determines how important or not it is to address those issues. And those are the types of things that we then pass on to the rest of our partners in our organization. Now, ideally, you're going to want to think about doing heuristic evaluations with multiple UX professionals. Usually each evaluator conducts an independent evaluation, then all of the evaluators meet and discuss findings. So while you can do heuristic evaluations with one person, and sometimes you're going to need to do that, it's understandable, but including multiple experts provides some really key benefits. Among those are that multiple evaluators will generally identify a greater number of issues than one single evaluator working independently. And that's really because each evaluator brings with them a unique perspective and different levels of domain knowledge and experience, which almost always leads to each evaluator uncovering some issues that others have not uncovered or don't uncover. It's also true that a lot of times the different evaluators discover the same issue, and that's actually a really good thing when that happens, because that gives you more confidence that the issue is one that's serious and one that you can have more confidence in within your findings. Finally, working with multiple evaluators provides an opportunity for collaboration and discussion as you work toward a consensus, which serves to strengthen the final set of findings that you actually pass on to your organization. And plus, it's really just awesome to get to work with your UX colleagues and discuss these things that a lot of other people don't find as interesting as we do. So, and we actually enjoy it a ton, or at least I do. For reference for everybody, our sweet spot at Fidelity is 3 UX researchers. That's typically what we use to do these evaluations. Now, the output of the evaluation is generally consists of a set of findings complete with severity ratings, where the more likely the issue is to cause a task failure, the higher the severity. So you can think of that as sort of the red dots here would represent things that are pretty severe, yellow, medium severity, green are issues that are either you're doing well in or very minor. And these are the types of things that we pass along to our teams. As with any methodology, there are advantages and disadvantages. When done right, heuristic evaluations are an effective method for uncovering usability issues, both big and small. Additionally, following a set of heuristics gives the organization a consistent way to evaluate experiences, and in turn, a consistent set of usability principles to design against. And what I mean by that is, as teams become more accustomed to the heuristics we're using, as they hear them over and over, or as we're doing multiple evaluations, they actually start to internalize and incorporate them into their own work, which only serves to improve experiences as we move forward. Also, the output can be used by product teams to help them understand what the experience is really like for our users and help them make informed decisions about where to focus their effort. And that informed is really what we're looking for, right? We want to help them make the hard decisions they have to make as product teams. On the flip side, heuristic evaluations aren't perfect. For example, as an expert, it's really, really hard to accurately assume the role of a user. And it's nearly, if not impossible, to eliminate all subjectivity and bias from the evaluations. Additionally, it will never uncover all usability issues, though it should do a good job at catching the most major ones. And most importantly, this is very key, it's not a substitute for talking with and involving users in your design and research activities more broadly. So while heuristic evaluation does not include users specifically or directly, we use this in conjunction with other methods, not in replacement of other methods. So why would you want to do an evaluation? Why would your company want to incorporate heuristic evaluations into their processes? I think at a high level, no matter where you work, a couple of constants probably hold true. One, teams are forever striving to move faster and cut costs. And as UXers, we're always striving to help teams understand and focus on our users. It can be challenging to balance faster, cheaper, and user-centered. Heuristic review as a method can help, and having it in your UX tool belt can be beneficial to your users, your organization, and to your own career alike. First, heuristic evaluations are quick. They can be performed in days versus weeks, which a typical usability study would take, and can help teams achieve peak velocity while at the same time maintaining focus on the user experience. They're also cheap. When compared to full-blown usability studies, they're far less costly due to the reduced time commitment and the elimination of recruiting fees and incentive costs. Additionally, heuristic evaluations can provide a shared understanding across the team or the broader organization of what the current experience is actually like for our customers. They also provide a consistent and user-centered mechanism for baselining the quality of the current experience and measuring progress over time as teams make improvements. So you can think of a baseline as being how is our current experience stacking up, and then as we make improvements, as we create new designs, how much are we improving? How much are we moving the needle for our customers? And finally, findings can serve as a leading indicator. And what I mean by that is that they can be a leading indicator of the ultimate success or failure of the thing being evaluated. So when we're looking at different experiences or features or functionality, major usability issues that we find through evaluations translate into poor evaluation scores. And poor scores can alert the org to big problems that need addressing long before lagging indicators, things like revenue, new accounts, or engagement metrics can ever do. So now that we've provided an overview of what heuristic evaluations are, let's talk a little bit about how they can fit into your organization. And while there's no real one right answer, I don't think, I can share how it fits into ours. We think about design research as a continuum with 3 distinct phases. Each phase is iterative in nature. The first phase is called right problem. In right problem, our aim is to first identify user needs and pain points, and then to understand those needs and pain points as well as we possibly can so that we're in a position to actually go solve for a problem that we understand. Once we've identified and understand needs and pain points, we shift our focus to thinking about how we could possibly solve for them. In the right solution phase is all about producing as many ideas as we can and rapidly testing them. Ultimately, we want to land on the best solution for the given problem we set out to solve. And it's worth noting that in right solution, we're really looking at sacrificial concepts, and we're looking to test as many things as we can. The more ideas we're testing out, the more likely it is that we get to a solution that makes the most sense for the problem or the need that we intended to solve for. Once we've landed on what we think that best solution is, we move into done right, which is really where the full design and development effort takes place. So we're really designing, building, and testing the solution to make sure that it does what it was intended to do and that it's understandable, usable, and hopefully delightful. We leverage heuristic evaluations in a couple of different ways in context of this framework. The first is when teams are embarking on what we call transformation projects. So transformation projects are where we have, as an organization, our teams have identified specific parts of the customer journey that we want to improve, and we're setting out to reimagine a specific part of that journey. For transformation projects, we want to begin by evaluating our current experience to identify pain points and friction. In the right problem phase, heuristic evaluation is one input and useful to let the team know where we're starting from, what our starting point is, but we're also leveraging other methods and prior research to learn as much as we can from and about our users. In right solution, we ideate, co-create, and test ideas until we've identified the design we think best eliminates the pain points. We then proceed by fully designing and building the reimagined experience. Now, you'll notice that heuristic evaluation shows up a couple times here. And that's because we use the technique as bookends to our process. We first baseline the current experience, which provides two key benefits for us. First, it provides a list of findings and pain points to the team so that they can use that as a starting place for their design process. That's where they start from. They know what they're trying to solve for and design against. Second, a set of baseline scores that they can use to measure success of the redesign through a user-centered lens. So it's hard sometimes to understand how much we're moving the needle for customers, for users, with design improvements. And this gives us a way to try to get at that and to help teams say, hey, this is where we started from, and look at how much we've improved the experience based on where we ended up after the redesign. Next, we partner closely with the teams to conduct research sprints, where we perform any number and any type of user research activities across all three phases. And that's really designed to answer any of the questions that are most important for the team at that point in time. So again, research sprints can really be anything across all three phases. This is where we're actually going out and we're talking to users, we're getting input from users, and we're using, again, the heuristic evaluation as bookends to this process. Then after we've designed and prototyped the new experience, again, we reevaluate to gauge the extent to which the changes have improved the quality of the experience. The second way we leverage heuristic evaluation is as a diagnostic tool to help us better understand what the experience is like across different parts of the customer journey. So instead of looking at it from one part that we want to go reimagine, we're trying to look across the experience at the different key components or key parts of the experience to understand what those are like as a diagnostic tool. Generally speaking, the customer journey for any company starts out small and focused, but over time, new parts of the journey are added, new features, new functionality, and it becomes increasingly difficult to understand what that end-to-end experience is really like for our customers. Similarly to how we use heuristic evaluations as bookends for transformation projects, we use them here to help us better understand the end-to-end experience. So to start, we perform baseline heuristic evaluations for each step across a journey. And by steps, I mean things like, you might consider opening an account as a step, and searching for an item as a step, and purchasing an item as another step. This allows us to construct a picture of what the current experience is like for our customers as they traverse through the different steps. As more and more steps of the journey are evaluated, we begin to gain a more concrete understanding of the overall experience and where the problem areas exist, which helps leaders make better decisions about which steps need to be improved and in what order. So if we're looking at these sort of 8 steps as a customer journey, we might say that, hey, after evaluation, we think the ones in red, so the places where we have the most severe issues, are the places where we should focus our time, money, and effort. And then maybe we'll go to the yellows after that, and the greens are actually good. So we just don't want to screw that up. So provides us a picture of what that experience actually looks like. This also provides teams a consistent way to measure experience improvements over time as we reevaluate and compare our progress against the original baseline evaluation. So you can see here, over time, as we're redesigning things, we're reevaluating, and the reds hopefully are moving to yellows or to greens, and the yellows are moving to greens, and the greens, as I mentioned before, are staying the same. So we're just not screwing anything up there. But what this does, again, is lets us provide that sort of measurement mechanism and a way to understand how we're doing over time. So at this point, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to pause and stop to answer any questions. So I think the method is to enter any questions you may have in the chat, and maybe we have some already, I'm not sure, but we'll give it a minute here and see if there are any questions at this point. And then after that, I'll hand it off to Anne, who will take you through what you need in order to conduct a heuristic evaluation, and also how to do it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cory. I am just checking here. Let's see. So what do you think, Cory, about using internal subject matter experts as reviewers after training them up a bit on how to do heuristics? So people who may not be UX professionals, but people who know the subject matter well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've had these conversations. I think that it really is going to depend on your organization and the size of your team, right? So at a place like Fidelity, specifically our UX research team is over 40 people. So we have the resources to be able to um, stick to sort of the experts to do these things. And because we have such a big team, we actually think it's a key component of what we can offer. We can offer this expertise. We know what users think. We know we talk to them all the time. So we actually want to keep this in-house in terms of researchers at Fidelity. But at other places, you might not have the liberty to do that, or the resources to do that, or the size of the team. So you may need to include others who are maybe not UX researchers or UX designers. But what I think you want to look for there is the ability to for the folks that you are picking out to be as unbiased as possible, to be interested in that, actually interested in improvement, right? As opposed to interested in giving themselves a good score or something like that. So.
Sure. Great. So we do have a question here about what heuristics you use. I think Anne's going to go into that a little bit later, so I'm going to hold off on asking that question. You mentioned, Cory, about the three evaluators is kind of your sweet spot, and is consensus always the goal?
So that's a great question. I think what we're trying to get to, and Anne will touch on this a little bit. So we have a couple different components of our scoring. We have an individual heuristic score, and then we actually roll that up into an overall score, because we're trying to compare these things across the steps across their journey. In that case, it does help to try to get to a consensus, and that doesn't always it isn't always the case. Different evaluators see things differently, and that's part of the reason that we really recommend that you use a group of folks to do this, because so much rich information comes out in those discussions. I may have seen things one way because of my experience or my knowledge level, or the way that I interact with certain screens or systems. And another evaluator might have seen things totally differently, and we can both be right, but the discussion brings out, more than anything, I think, the severity. Like how severe is this? Would it cause me to pick up the phone and call, to get so frustrated that I never come back, whatever the case is? And I think it helps to have that discussion. So there are a lot of times where we're not going to totally agree on something, but we are trying to get to a score that we can all agree on, so that we can be confident in when we give our recommendations and when we give our findings to these teams. We've talked through it, we understand where we're at, and we can back up what we're putting out to them based on those discussions, those really rich discussions that we have.
Okay. So, Cory, I think you talked about this a little bit, but do you do heuristics just on something that's new, like a new app or a website, or do you do it on things that have existed for a while?
Yeah, you can do it both ways. I think when I mentioned that there's no one right way to do it, this is what we're talking about. So the slide I'm on right now, I think covers this pretty well. So what we're trying to do at Fidelity is actually baseline existing experiences as much as we possibly can, so that we have that to compare against. Now, you can do evaluations on new products, new products, new apps, whatever the case is, or experiences within them. But what adds a lot of power to this is that if you had done the baseline, you have something to compare to. Assuming that something existed in the first place, it doesn't always exist. But if it does, if you do the baseline, you can say, here's where we were. This was an abysmal experience to start with. Here's where we ended up after the redesign. And it gives you a method to say, from an experience point of view, we think we're really making improvements, and here's why. Otherwise, you kind of get pulled into the trap of business KPIs only, and it's really hard to understand are we making an impact from an experience point of view, from a design point of view or not? And it's hard to tell those things from, you know, revenue and new accounts and, you know, metrics like that, which are the ones we typically get a lot of.
Okay. One last question before we move on to Anne. Do you do this process with journey maps already established or against personas, or do you do it against a general point of view, not persona based? So are journey maps already done? Do you do it against personas? That's the question.
Yeah, we are a huge company, and in that we have a lot of different groups who work differently, and it depends on the group that we're working with. So some groups have a pretty well defined idea of what their journey is, and that's great, and you can use that. What we're doing, sort of try to do it across the organization, is by defining what we're calling critical user tasks. So those are things like open an account, place a trade, move money, the ways that our customers experience us or have relationships with us, the major things we make them do. We're trying to break down the journey that way in terms of tasks and measure each one of those tasks independently, so that we can then start to tell how are we doing, you know, overall. But you can do it. You can definitely do it in different ways.
Okay, great. So I know we have some more questions, but we're going to get back to the talk, and hopefully we can address some more of these after Anne talks about her aspects. So over to you, Anne.
Great. First, quick check of my technology. Can you folks see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes.
So Cory gave a broad strokes look at heuristic evaluations and how to incorporate it into a framework. I'm going to get into more of the nuts and bolts of what do you need to have for a successful heuristic evaluation? Kind of a bit of foreshadowing from some of the questions that you had earlier. So what do you need for a successful heuristic evaluation? And my screen froze. Hold on. I don't know why. Sorry, my screen froze for a minute.
And Anne did mention she's in the middle of an epic storm right now in North Carolina, so give her a little leeway there.
Yes, we're experiencing storms. Let me try again. There we go. So I'm going to go over heuristics first. There are lots of heuristics out there. Don Norman has some heuristics. Human Factors International has some heuristics. There's a lot that you can choose from. So what do we look at? Well, I'm going to go over the Nielsen Norman group is kind of the industry standard, gold standard for heuristic evaluations. It's tried and true. It's been around forever. There are 10 of them. And I'm going to go through them each individually and give you some examples of what each one means. Some of you are going to be familiar with them, others may not. So the first one that I'm going to go over is visibility of system status. What that is you really want to keep users informed while they're going through the experience. Examples that I like that show visibility of system status are maps. So when you're using your phone map and you see the little dot that says you are here, that's a great example of visibility system status. You might also have heard the term breadcrumbs, which is used in navigation to let users know where they are on a website. Another great example of visibility system status. Then there's matching between the system and the real world. Really what that's about is using familiar concepts and language to your users. Great examples for this are like in delete items on your system, you drag it over to the trash can where an actual trash can is the real world. I also like the example of a highlighter. You use a highlighter in a book. You can use highlighter in online documents.
¿Qué hacen aquí esas tijeras?
The other one that I like is user control and freedom. What this is about is giving users an out. So good examples of that are emergency exits in the real world and undo features in different programs that you use. Then there's consistency and standards. So you really want to make sure that you maintain consistency throughout your entire experience so that it doesn't seem disjointed. And good examples of that are in the real world, when you check into the airport or check into the hotel, they always keep them in the same place. It's always at the very beginning. And then there are different brands that have different product lines. So when you go to their sites, they feel similar and consistent. Error prevention. This is about avoiding slips and mistakes. So if you've ever driven down a highway, you see those guardrails. So you don't, if your car goes off, it doesn't fall in the ditch. That's an example of error prevention. My other favorite one is, it saved me a lot, is when you're typing email and you have an attachment and you say, I have this attached, but you've forgotten the attachment. A lot of times you will get an error message that says, remember you have an attachment, did you mean to do that? So that's a great example of error prevention. Then there's recognition rather than recall, or visibility of options, actions, and elements. So two really good examples of that is whenever you're on your computer and you're doing a document and you're searching, you see recent documents when you open a new one. The other one is just bookmarks. When you're using browsers, that's recognition rather than recall. Flexibility and efficiency of use. This one is really about tailoring to all users. One of the examples that I like is defaults. So when you set defaults on websites, or if websites recognize that you're from a certain area or country, and you have selected that you're from the United States or from Canada, and then when you go back every time, it goes to that particular country site. Shortcuts are an also good example of flexibility and efficiency of use. Then there's aesthetic and minimalist design. We want to remove distractions from our users. And the example they use on the Nielsen Norman site that I like in the real world is a three-legged stool. If you sit on the stool, it's the same thing as you sit on that cushy sofa that you have at home. So that's an example of minimalist design. And everybody's search engine that they use, Google, that's a really good example of minimalist design as well. So helping users recognize, diagnose, and recover from error. You want to make sure that if your users do happen to have an error and they slip up, that you make it clear that they did. So error messages that they receive for password hints are incorrect. That would be an example of that. Page not found. If they go to a page that no longer exists, it lets them know that it no longer exists and then gives them options of where to go so that they can recover from that error. And then there's help and documentation. You really want to provide your users with a way to have information. Tooltips. So if you see tooltips, if you're ever filling out a form and you're not sure what that label means, that is an example of help and documentation. And the real world example I like are information kiosks for users in a real world experience. And if you are in a complicated industry, help and documentation is really critical to make sure users understand how to go through the experience, especially if they're looking for things. Nielsen Norman site does a great job of giving videos and resources for you to apply these different heuristics and understand them. So while I didn't give visual examples, I highly recommend that you go to the Nielsen Norman site in order to get more information if you need it. And I know that Jen is going to provide a link to this later on as well. So the other thing that I want to talk about related to heuristic evaluations are scores. And just like the heuristics, there are a variety of scoring scales to use for a heuristic evaluation. We all may be familiar with severity scales that we give developers when we do usability testing. So it's similar in nature. to doing that. And how you use the scores is that you score the experience against the heuristic that I just gave. So when you go through the experience as you're evaluating it, you will find issues. You want to see how the issues that you have in that experience match up with the heuristics that you are using. And based on that, then you give it a score. This is the example of the Nielsen Norman scoring scale. It's a 0 to 4 scale. And 0 is you don't agree that this is a usability problem at all. 1 is it's a cosmetic problem only. 2 is it's a minor usability problem. 3 is it's a major usability problem. And finally, 4, it's a disaster. It's a usability catastrophe. So you will notice that the usability catastrophe, it has a higher number. Some industry experts make the high score the best score. So they flip it. So 4 would actually be, I don't agree that this is a usability problem at all. I tend to prefer that because it follows what we call mental models, or with grades and education. When you think of grades, the higher the grade, the better. We like to do scoring sheets to make evaluating easier. So I gave 2 examples, one from UX Planet there on the left and one from sampleexamples.com of scoring sheets that can make things a little bit easier as you're scoring against these heuristics. You would list the different heuristics out and then make it easy to select a score. So I recommend that you include hints by showing the experience flow, because if it's a difficult flow, you want to make sure that those evaluators that Cory was talking about know how to get through the flow themselves, and then you have it on the scoring sheet. And then you want to include information about accessing the product or the experience that you're evaluating. How do you get there? So these are examples of scoring sheets, and I will get into more detail of the scoring sheet that we like. So then there's scenarios, and this question came up earlier, and I want to give example of like, what do you include when you do a scenario? So really what a scenario is meant to do is set the stage. It's about the reason why a user comes to a system site or application. And then there's the task, the to-do for that system site or application. Now, how does it look as an example? So this is examples about Nora, and she enjoys cooking in her spare time. She is tired of the same old recipes she has been using and wants to find some new recipes. She goes on easyrecipes.com to see if she can find any recipes she likes, and is especially looking for the one that includes chicken and pasta. So really the beginning part is setting the stage for why Nora is coming to the site. She's coming to the site because she's tired of her recipes and she wants to find some new ones. And the task for her, or the to-do, is she's going to find a recipe that includes both chicken and pasta. So there are some additional items necessary for a heuristic evaluation, and Cory touched on a few of these earlier. The evaluators, are the number of them. Industry experts recommend 3 to 5. Cory mentioned how we like to use 3. And then the scoring process, scoring independently, and then having a consensus meeting, or then score in one meeting. And then involvement, or deciding who else should be involved in the process and observe in the process. Cory mentioned how we like to get a variety of folks who are stakeholders involved, from development, IT areas, as well as design and business. So they can also help craft that scenario or the different tasks. Then there's the product. Is this a current site or a prototype? I think that was one of the questions that was asked. So you can use the heuristics on either as the baseline that Cory mentioned, or early on in the process, use the current site, or when you're about ready to go live with a prototype to see if you have improved. And then there's the report. You want to create a report that resonates with both design and business teams after you're done doing the heuristic evaluation. Then there are reports that resonate the business teams that I just mentioned, and I wanted to show some examples of that. On the left is where you would see the different scores to each of the heuristics. And on the right is you want to get into the details of each page finding that you had in the heuristic evaluation. So the next section I'm going to go on is, what does a heuristic evaluation look like in practice? If we have time, which I'm not sure if we do, I'm looking at the time.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good. Okay. If anybody has any questions before I get into like what this looks like in practice, we're happy to answer any questions.
I think, Anne, nothing. I don't think we have anything very specific about that. So let's go ahead and maybe walk through it, and then we'll see at the end after your walkthrough if there's any additional questions.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to evaluate a site. It's a fictitious site for having takeout delivered. I think we're all familiar with that these days. And it is called Takeout Express. So let's think about it in terms of a checklist and what we need in order to evaluate Takeout Express. So we need that set of heuristics. We need to know which scoring scale we're going to use, what scenario, how many evaluators we can have, what is the scoring process, what is the product or the experience that we are going to evaluate, what should that scoring sheet look like, and then what will the report look like at the end. So the set of heuristics, as you probably could have guessed, we're going to do the Nielsen-Norman heuristics that I just reviewed. And then which scoring scale? We're going to use the 0 to 4 scale, but as I mentioned earlier, I like to flip it so that the highest number is the one that there are no usability issues at all, and the 0 is a usability catastrophe. And then what is the scenario? So this one obviously is a little bit different than Nora example. This is about Takeout Express. And Samantha works full time and is short on time as well. She and her partner are hungry for dinner, and tonight is one of those nights where she is too tired to make dinner for the two of them. They are hungry for a nice hand-tossed pepperoni pizza. She decides to order dinner through Takeout Express. It's a new local delivery service that just launched their beta app. So that kind of sets the stage and gives the task that Samantha is looking to get takeout for a pepperoni pizza from Takeout Express. So how many evaluators? We've mentioned this several times, so you probably could have guessed we're going to do 3 evaluators. And Cory went through the details. Another interesting thing about using 3 is if you only have 2 evaluators, I always think of that third person as kind of a tiebreaker as well. So what is the scoring process? Well, we like to score individually and give the evaluators a week to go through it, to come up with the heuristics and come up with their scores. And then after that week, have the consensus meeting. So that's how we're going to handle it here. Then what is the product? We're doing that beta app for Takeout Express. What should the scoring sheet look like? I mentioned that we would go into a little bit more detail about the scoring sheet. We like to use Mural. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Mural, but it is a whiteboarding tool where you can put sticky notes on things as well as images. How do we set up that Mural? Well, we put the heuristics on there. So all of the evaluators are familiar with the heuristics. Then we have the sticky notes where the evaluators put their scores. Then the scenario, followed by those hints or that workflow in case any of the evaluators get stuck themselves and need to know what the correct path is. Then how to access the product and the product location. And then what does the debrief look like? So we like to do a tallied score with detailed findings. I'll show you what that tallied score looks like. Cory mentioned how we like to do with the tallied score, we like to tally it up and give a usability rate. So you can see the scores here on the right and then the usability rate. And how you get to the usability rate is it's a total of 40 points because there's 10 heuristics with 4 being the top. And then you multiply that by 100. And then that's how, in this case, you got to 55. And the reason we like to do that usability rate, as Cory alluded to, is it allows for a comparison against the products, or it allows, if you're scoring from beginning to the end, you can see the uptick, hopefully, that you get with the new experience. And in terms of interpreting the usability rate, we consider 0 to 33 poor, 34 to 66 average, and 67 to 100 excellent. So now that we have our checklist of items for Takeout Express, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to Takeout Express. And we did have some technical difficulties before, so hopefully you will see this. And then after I take you to Takeout Express, I will take you to the mural whiteboarding system so that you can see that in detail. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. So this is Takeout Express. You can notice that it says ordering takeout with us is easy in 4 steps, and it lays out the steps in 1, 2, 3, 4. You provide a login, you choose the restaurant, you choose the meal, and you confirm. Then you provide, here's the login information and the details, followed by the account information, your name, email, phone address, followed by selecting the restaurant. So here you would select, in this case, we know that they want pizza, so it would be that option. And then choosing the pizza, we know it's pepperoni, so you click that. And if you notice, there might be a slight difference of how this looks in the prior screen. And then you choose the size of your pizza, and then voila, you're done. So that gives you an idea of what our fictitious takeout site is. Now I'm going to take you to the mural whiteboarding system and how we set that up. Pardon the load time. And I'm going to zoom out so that you can get a bigger view of what's going on in this mural, because there's a lot of information here. So I'm going to give you the high level view, and then I'll dig in deep into the different sections. So at the top of the mural, this is instructions for doing the heuristic evaluation to different evaluators. Then this area here gives the scenario that I talked about with Samantha ordering the pizza. And then here's the hints and the tasks right here. And then here's the different scores. So I'm going to try to zoom in so you can kind of get an idea how we do the different steps. 1, 2, 3, each of the steps that you go through. And if you can see this, here is the scenario and how the measurement's done. So then there's the scoring area. We repeat the scores so that people know which scores we're using. And they know that usability catastrophe is a 0 and 4 is an excellent. And in this case, the scoring team is myself, Cory, and then our colleague named Bob. And here on the left-hand side, trying to go a little bit slow, is so that you can see each of the heuristics listed out here on the left. And then what we do is give sticky notes and a score for each of them. So you can see here that I gave this a 0 for the particular visibility of system status. Well, why did I give this a 0 for visibility of system status? Well, let me zoom in so you can see a little bit more. Well, I gave it a 0 overall because there was a lot of areas that needed status updates. There was no progress meter. If you're familiar with progress meters, they let users know where they're going from page to page. And it wasn't clear on this account information page which fields were required. And then Cory here also gave it a 0. So he gave it a 0 because he was unable to search for the type of food. There was no search. And then Bob gave it a 0 because there was also no progress indicator. Now, all of these are hypothetical scores that we're giving you. So a lot of times we often think of a 0 as you're not able to complete that task. In Cory's case for searching, he was not able to complete that task. So the consensus score, this is the ideal when you have everybody giving a 0, and you can see here that it is a 0. Then there is matching system to the real world. So I gave it a 3. The language is easy to understand. It's super easy, very plain language. Cory gave it a 2. Well, he was forced to tap the continue button when selecting the pizza type. And expectations are set ahead of time for the overall process. So if you recall on that first screen, it had those 4 easy steps. So he let folks know that. And then it looks like Bob gave it a 2. And the consensus score was a 2. And due to time, I am going to jump over to the consistency and standards. This is the one where it follows widely accepted industry standards for design and copy. I gave it a 1. I gave you a little bit of a hint when we were going through the site of jumping in and out from Takeout Express to ABC Pizza could increase user what we call cognitive load and be jarring to them because it has changed. Cory gave it a 0. And he gave this a 0, again, for that jarring experience where I'm showing these screens. And he picked up on the fact that there's no expected delivery time on a confirmation page. And Bob also gave it a 0 because there's no option to select quantity. So Samantha, if she wanted 2 pizzas, there was no way to select 2 pizzas. So the consensus score was a 0, even though I gave it a 1, because once I saw Cory's explanations and Bob's explanations along with what I found, I was willing to go down to that 0 for this because it was hard to complete the task. So that gives you an idea of the mural board and how you come to a consensus using these different scores. And I am going to minimize my screen, and I'm going to now show you, I showed you the mural board and how we come to the score. What does the overall picture look like? So in this case, you see a lot of red on here. Visibility system status was a 0, and you can see how we went down and gave each score. Well, it had a total points of 11, and then that usability rate that we discussed before, where it's at out of 40 points times 100 is 28. So this usability rate will allow Takeout Express to be able to say this was the beginning experience that we looked at and what they can do to improve the experience. And then they can see how it compares with that usability rate. So these are the types of things that we would give our internal stakeholders ideas of where they can improve. And then in order to wrap up, I am going to hand it back to Cory because I think we should get an update on his situation with his house and plumbing.
You're
Thank
muted,
you, Ann.
Cory.
I'm sure that's what everybody wants is an update on my plumbing. So here we go.
They do.
All right, give me 1 second. And how are we looking from a share perspective? We good here?
Yes.
We're good.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Ann. And if you remember, the heating and plumbing inspector had to just inform me that he needed to show me something as part of the inspection. And what he did is he took a close look at our hot water heater, which for anyone who may be unfamiliar is the huge tank of water that's present in a lot of homes, controls the hot water to your home. And generally you wouldn't think to inspect a hot water heater, at least I wouldn't, that is less than 4 years old. Everything was new when we moved in. But as a result of following the set of inspection guidelines, he actually did take a look, and we're thankful that he did. In doing so, he discovered a small crack that it had actually started leaking water. And this is in the back of our utility closet. I never would have seen it. It's hard to say how long we had until our hot water tank would have burst and our house would have been flooded, but it probably wouldn't have been too long. And based on, you know, their recommendation, you know, you better do this, you better get it fixed as quick as possible. So we did, but the point is the inspector, following a set of guidelines, had quickly and cheaply found a big issue that we otherwise wouldn't have found until it was too late. This allowed us as the homeowners to focus on fixing that issue right away because it, you know, is a pretty high priority. Similar to the value that the inspector provided for us as homeowners, you can bring the same type of value to your organization by implementing heuristic evaluation to do a few things. One, identify usability issues quickly and cheaply. Two, provide user-focused information to product teams to help them make informed decisions. And finally, to measure improvements to the user experience over time. So that's where we'll leave it today. We just wanted to say thank you again for everyone attending. And we'll open it up, I think, for questions if anybody has any.
Yes, we do, Cory. We have lots of questions for you and Anne. Everybody give like a nice little reaction, applause, thumbs up if you thought that was cool. Yes. Yay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and hop into the questions. I do apologize. We probably won't get to everyone's questions, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. So what are some ways that you can eliminate or avoid bias when you're going through this process? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, and jump in.
Yeah.
I mentioned that it's impossible, I think, to avoid it all. The main, and then going back to another question we got earlier, do we want to include folks from outside the research or design practices? I think those types of folks, and especially researchers, are a little bit more knowledgeable and experienced in what bias is and why it matters, and we try to eliminate it from everything that we do. Again, it's impossible, but I think one of the ways is by including, you know, your evaluators, making sure that they are well aware, and if possible, practitioners of UX research, because it's something that we understand well, and we try to do as much as we can in our everyday work. Though again, not possible to remove it all, and I wouldn't pretend that it would be. I don't know, Anne, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, you know, we touched upon having multiple evaluators, and I think just the mere fact that you have multiple evaluators scoring the experience, that helps, and that consensus score coming to that also helps eliminate the bias a little bit more. You're never going to eliminate it totally, but having multiple for diversity of thought really helps with that.
Okay.
Agreed.
Great. So you mentioned Nielsen's 10, and I know that there were some other heuristics that didn't quite make the cut. There's a lot of heuristics out there. Let's just talk about Nielsen Norman's 10. Do you do all of them, or do you just pick a few of them to do?
No, we do all 10 of them for the evaluation. And I think it's also important to think about with the different heuristics out there, depending on different companies, your UXD team may also have design principles, and thinking about like those design principles and goals and how the different heuristics match up with those is also an important aspect when choosing heuristics, because I know that played an important part of it for me and for Cory when selecting the heuristics. And it wasn't just the two of us. We worked a lot with our design and business teams on this as well.
And I think
Cory?
One thing that we've done, yeah, we use Nielsen's for the reasons Anne has laid out, and we actually have appended Nielsen's with a couple extra things that we think are really important that we see over and over in user research and problems that our customers are having. And some of those things, just for instance, are navigation into the task itself. Can people find it? How hard is it to find? How hard is it to get into? And then also, are we giving people clear paths once they complete the task? Do they know what to do, what they can do, and are we giving them paths to actually do those things or not? So those are two examples of pieces that weren't necessarily embedded within Nielsen's 10 that we have actually appended where we thought made the most sense. So we're still sticking majority to the 10. And again, if you have questions, reference that site. It's great. Watch those videos. They're awesome. And it'll take you through in a really sort of approachable and friendly way in terms of trying to learn what those things mean and how to use them. So
Sure. Okay. So you mentioned, Cory and Ann, 3 to 5 evaluators. Why is that a number and that you recommend? And how do you kind of get them to align in their evaluation? What recommendations do you provide to them or guidance to get them to make sure they're kind of evaluating things in the same way?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So 3 to 5 actually was based on research that we did out in the industry. Different folks recommend 3, others recommend 5. And really what it also has to do with your return on investment. So the number of evaluators you have will more likely find the number of usability issues. So if you're familiar with usability testing, it's kind of like your rule of thumb with usability testing is 5, and anything more than that, then your return on investment goes down. Think about that also in terms of evaluation, with 3 kind of being the mark, where again, if you have 2, you might have a tie. That third person is that tiebreaker. So that's kind of where we got that 3 to 5 is based on recommendations from industry, or 2 to 5, I believe, and we like 3. And then what was the second part of the question? It was a 2-parter.
Sure. How do you get everybody to sort of evaluate in the same way?
Oh, right. Yeah. So we do training with our UX research to figure out, like, to show them the different heuristics, and it takes a lot of practice getting it together. And we used to have a joke that I was the tough grader and other people were not the tough grader. I think the key is that consensus meeting is really important, so that you can get that diversity of thought in that and get to the consensus score, but you get the diversity of thought at the same time. Cory, do you have anything else to add in terms of education and training and thoughts around that?
I mean, that's a good answer. We also try to confine the scope of what we're trying to evaluate, right? So it's not that somebody's going way off further than anyone else went or starting way before. We're trying to confine it to a pretty narrow set of guardrails so that we know what we're working within, and that helps to confine the thought and the experience that people go through. So I think that's a big one. And then going back to the first question, I saw this pop up in the chat and I wanted to have it up just in case. And here we are. So there's actually a study, I think, done by Nielsen Norman that shows the proportion of usability problems found versus the number of evaluators in this type of situation. And I mean, really, you can use as many as you want. You're going to find more issues if you use more. And talked about sort of diminishing returns after a while. And you'll see sort of the number of issues found falls off a cliff after you get past, I don't know, 5 or 6. So you could do more if you wanted to. It's a lot harder to set up. It takes a lot more time, the more people you have involved. And typically, we're just not going to have a lot of resources, a ton of resources to throw at this. So we've landed on 3 because it works best for us.
Okay, great. So in the example you walked us through, and you talked about a scenario, and you gave a little bit of context of what this person was going to be doing. So in some circumstances, we see the question here that people didn't really have a scenario to evaluate against. So could you talk a little bit about maybe the pros and cons of having that scenario? And if you don't have one, how would you conduct the evaluation?
You know, that's a great question, because You don't necessarily need to have a scenario to do a heuristic evaluation, but we like to do it because it does really help set that stage. I think the key is within that scenario is the tasks. So the example I showed happened to have a flow. You might not have an experience. You might be looking at a home page or a different page, and you need to have a task of what the top tasks users are doing in your site so that you can evaluate based on that top task whether you're able to get that job done essentially or that task completed. It could be just finding information within the site. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. So I would say setting the stage may not be as important, but definitely have those tasks in mind when you're evaluating things, because that can give you an idea of what to play off on and what you're looking at. Cory, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, that's good. I think the only thing that I would add to that is it serves as a good documentation tool for what exactly we scored and what exact mindset we were in, so that if folks are coming and looking at this when we're not there to present the information or down the road, I don't know about you, like 3 months down the road, I don't remember what I did 3 months ago. So we can always look back at those and say, oh yeah, that's right. This is exactly the mind frame we were in. This is the specific flow or task that we scored. So it serves as a grounding element as well as you look back on these things over time too. So.
Okay, just going to do a couple more questions here. Do you ever examine the difference between expected behavior versus the actual behavior or current state? Like what you expect to happen, I think this says. Do you put that into the evaluation that what you expected to happen wasn't exactly what happened based on the interface? Does that make sense?
I think so. Is it based on like the evaluator's expectations or based on the user expectations?
I guess it would be kind of both, right?
Yeah.
Potentially.
So yeah, we do. Like, for instance, when we gave that takeout pizza, you know, Cory was expecting search. And that's another reason that's good to have multiple evaluators. I'm not a person that uses search, but Cory is. So his expectation is, oh, I am expecting search. And he didn't see that. So for that particular area, he didn't score it as well because he didn't see it. So that didn't meet Cory's expectations for search. Cory, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that's where I was going to go too. Is that there are some expectation pieces built in, especially to the Norman or Nielsen Norman 10, in terms of meeting conventions and meeting expectations. So I think some of that stuff is built in. I think a lot of times when we talk about hypotheses and what do we think is going to happen, we'll loop that stuff into our user tests a lot more often, probably. But in terms of evaluation specifically, yeah, some of that is built in, at least to the Nielsen heuristics that we use.
Okay, just one more question here for you both. How do you determine the frequency of when you reevaluate? What are some of the factors that you mentioned, Cory, you could do it at the beginning and do it again later. What helps you determine that you're going to reevaluate at another point?
I think there's two. So I mentioned we do heuristic evaluations for sort of two different types of projects. The transformation project, when we get into that, teams already know that they're going to go in and they want to reimagine this feature or functionality, piece of functionality, whatever it is. So the reevaluation is sort of already set for you. You're going to try to baseline it. What is the current experience like? And then whenever the team is finished, meaning they have their solution and they've at least prototyped the solution they're going with, that's when you would reevaluate. So in transformation cases, I think it's sort of built in for you. You're following the track of the team, and when we're ready, when we have a solution in place, we can reevaluate. In terms of the using it as a diagnostic tool, we're trying to get out in front and we're trying to baseline as many of these key tasks as we can to give the organization an idea of where our experience is suffering, you would go back in and reevaluate if there is a point in time when leaders or whoever said, well, we have a bunch of red over here. We have a bunch of tasks that are pretty bad from a user experience point of view, and we need to put a team or two on those to redesign them. You'd probably reevaluate after a team has touched that experience or changed it significantly. So you might be waiting a while on that one, or it might be something that you're doing fairly frequently. And I think you can do multiple reevaluations. I know teams like to, in terms of working in Agile, you have pretty fast release schedules. So it might only be a release or two until you want to reevaluate it again. I think that would be fine. So there's no set schedule in my mind.
Okay, Anne, did you have anything to add to that?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Cory and Anne. I thought this was a great presentation, and I know I learned a lot. So really appreciate it. It's been labeled as happy hour, where we stay on for a few more minutes if people want to ask some general questions of the group. I'm not sure. Yeah, there's Cory. I'm not sure if Anne's on anymore. But
Did I have a beer for this? Is that what you're saying?
I know, my wine is too far.
You didn't prepare us. We have to be prepared. So next month, everybody, you know that this is going to happen. So come prepared.
That's
Yes,
right.
bring your beverage of choice, coffee, tea, whatever you want. So Cory's still here. If anybody has any further, Anne's here too. Hi,
Yes,
Anne.
I'm here too. Hi.
If anybody has any further, I know we didn't get to all the questions. If anybody has a question for Anne or Cory about heuristic evaluation or just in general for the community, we'll spend a few more minutes. Shout out your question.
Hey, I've got a question. So a heuristic evaluation is something you could do at any time in a product development process. Do you think that one part of the process benefits more than others from doing a heuristic evaluation?
Could you clarify what part of the process?
Oh,
would you mean by
yeah. Thanks for asking the follow-up. So I'm thinking like you haven't released the product yet, or the product is out and people are using it and having trouble with it, or you just want to fine tune it, or any time from like we have an idea to we have something that people are using.
Yeah. So my gut reaction to that is it's more beneficial up front. I think if you think back to what we discussed in terms of right problem, right solution, done right, 3 phases. Other companies call it different things, but if you're able to give your teams a good idea of where you're starting from and where those problems exist now, like what are the pain points for your customers in your experience, that's one of the main goals, right? So that they can say, okay, we're going to prioritize fixing this thing that's really bad. And then as you go through, so that's kind of the right problem, identify those problems and needs, right? And as you go through right solution done right, hopefully you're able to talk to users and you're able to usability test, and you're able to do all the things that are more traditional so that you're getting that input and that feedback from users as you go. And then at the end, yeah, it's great to be able to reevaluate, but I think you get maybe more out of it, at least my opinion, up front, so the teams can take all those findings and move those forward and try to make improvements from that.
And a quick follow-up. So I usually think about a competitive analysis as something that's really good to do before you start as well. So do you think that that would go hand in hand with it, or you do one before the other, or any thoughts about that?
It's a good question. I almost think we sometimes are too focused on what our competitors are doing. So it's nice to know, and it's nice to see what's out there, and maybe that'll spark ideas. Or if somebody's just killing it, right, you can decide, well, what are they doing? Let's figure that out. So I think you could do it in conjunction, and that will let you know kind of where you stand next to others. But sometimes it's also hard to find apples to apples comparisons with competitors. But I almost think that we worry too much about competitors sometimes, as opposed to focusing on needs. What our customers need and problems they have, and trying to fix those. So I would say you can do it. I wouldn't put too much effort into that personally.
And every customer is different, right? Like our customer base may be different than another customer base, right? So you've also got that nuance as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that great answer.
Well, thanks for the question.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, sorry. I have a question, and I'll try and keep it pretty broad so that it's generalizable to a lot of people. I'm a current grad student, and I'm trying to break into the field after I graduate. And everyone says that experience is king. You need hands-on experience in order to get a position. And since that's hard to get, one way that I've heard that you can get that is learning a skill and then offering pro bono UX consulting services to a company. And so I'm wondering if you think that a heuristic evaluation is something that a student or someone trying to break into the field could really study and then contact someone at a company and offer to give a free heuristic evaluation to boost my resume, my LinkedIn, everything. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a neat idea, and you could definitely add it to your LinkedIn, and it would show some of your UX chops, so to speak, because the heuristics that we showed are based on UX principles, right? So like you could even wrap it up into Gestalt or Fitts Law or things like that and really show how much you know about UX.
Yeah, Summer, I think that's awesome. I think that's showing sort of that entrepreneurial spirit would be a big win in my book from a hiring perspective. That would show a lot of drive to go out and do that. I think what it would also help boost is that you could have some examples to point to of work and be able to talk through sort of findings and why you did things a certain way or the types of recommendations that you were giving. So it would help you be able to have those conversations as you're talking to companies as well and have something solid and concrete to reference. So yeah, I think it's an awesome idea.
I have a question. Okay, hello?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you integrate heuristic evaluations in the whole process of UX research? So when do you determine we need to do this, and what is that which step is in the process?
Yeah, good question. I think for us, it kind of goes back to the type of project we're embarking on, but a more traditional project where the team wants to reimagine something, whatever it is. I think we're trying to do a lot of work of baselining up front. Where do we stand now? What are the problems that we face so that we can hand that stuff off to teams and they can measure against that? And then it's sort of the research sprints that I mentioned are the more traditional activities that are going on throughout each phase. So I think for me anyways and our team, it really, we're doing it right up front. Let's get the baseline, let's get findings to the team so they can take those and start somewhere solid. And then we can figure out where they end up after the redesign. You're doing a lot of more traditional, whether it's in-depth interviews or contextual inquiry or concept testing or usability testing, all of that stuff would fit sort of in the middle between the original baseline and wherever you ended up. Does that help, Kayla?
Yeah.
Okay.
But as a follow-up, so how many hours would you say it's in a typical project like this, would you have just three evaluators dedicated to do this?
Yeah, I had originally had a slide that talked about like how long a heuristic review or evaluation takes from beginning to end. And it can take up to 2 weeks, which isn't, like Cory was saying in the presentation, you save time, you save money. And when you think about a usability test, it is a lot less than a usability test. It usually takes about, I don't know, 2 to 3 or 4 days to set up the environment, create that whiteboarding, set up the scenario, get your business teams involved. And then if you do the full week or the 5 business days between the time that you have the evaluators take a look at the experience and then have that consensus meeting, that usually adds another week. And then because that mural, I have a saying with my colleagues, be kind to your future self. And the mural is a nice way to be kind to your future self in the debrief phase or the report phase, because you can grab and start moving the stickies into groups to create themes for the clients, and then the report doesn't take as long.
I see. That's a
I
good
hope
idea.
that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Michaela, in terms of, we're trying out a new sort of structure of Fidelity in terms of how we're sort of assigning researchers to work, and we're taking a new approach to where we're trying to be less reactive to a bunch of teams. We're like at a 1 to 10 ratio on average, researcher to designer. So in the past, it's been very reactive. We need a study, we need a usability study, whatever the case is, we'll come in, we'll try to do it, we'll do as much as we can. We're trying to get out of that business and into the business of we're attaching ourselves to the most important things that are going on in the organization, the most important projects, the most valuable projects.
Mhm.
And in doing that, we have teams assigned for longer periods of time. So it's not just jumping in and out one study at a time, it's we're here from beginning to end. So that same researcher or group of researchers can really do that first upfront baseline, right? And present that to the information to the team, and then work with the team throughout the life cycle of product development to get to a place where we feel really good about what we're putting out there in the end. So I think some of it comes from we're trying to rearrange ourselves to create more value and do more valuable work rather than just be in and out of studies all the time, which puts us in sometimes a bad spot.
Good for you. Good that you can do that.
We're going through the process of collecting our lumps right now, and we're getting there.
Okay.
All
very
right, looks
good.
like Nate, you have your hand up. I see you next. You want to have?
Sure. Yeah. So I was just thinking about this point, Cory, that you just made about trying to work on more strategic projects with this work. And I'm just curious about any collaboration tips with product management. So are you finding yourself having to interface between kind of leading UX and collaborating with project management leadership in the process of doing that? And how do you kind of surface your perspectives on priorities and integrate that into other perspectives in the organization on prioritization?
Cory, you're on mute.
Sorry. Prioritization is always a hot topic and something that's not easy to do necessarily. We are fairly lucky at Fidelity in that a lot of times we're sort of built in or baked into the process. So we have really close relationships with the product managers, and especially when we're attaching ourselves to those more valuable projects, they are specifically requesting that they have researchers and designers along for the ride. So we're in a good spot where we sit in the organization to have a real sort of voice and impact on those discussions and on the prioritization, because it's a resource that's sort of being requested by those teams that are working on those sort of bigger, more important projects. So I think we're lucky in a lot of ways as compared to other organizations where you might have to be constantly sort of arguing for or proving, value and worth of the research that we're doing.
All right.
I don't know if that helps.
No, I was going to add the
next. Oh, sorry.
the heuristic evaluation is a nice way to also help prioritize the projects for them as well, and figure out, if you've got that usability catastrophe, how you prioritize the changes that the team needs to make.
I guess just to quickly clarify, I'm curious about how you frame up the business impact of some of the things that you surface from a UX perspective, or do you bother to do that? Do you leave that to be the project manager's job to actually clarify the business case for, the burning platform from a usability perspective, or do you take the lead on translating, like knowledge translation, saying, well, here's the usability set, but then this is the business implication, and here's how everyone should be thinking about that?
One of the more successful methods I think that I've found lately is by framing what we're doing around how good it's going to make them look in the end, right? So we have something that's not a great experience right now. That's not your fault as a product owner. You're trying to improve it. You can't do a good job of telling the organization how much you've improved the experience because we don't have good measures for that. It's really hard to measure that. You can measure revenues and account opens and clicks and things like that, but that's hard to say that was due to your design. Whereas if you work with us, you do this type of work, you can say very clearly, here's what the experience was like for our customers to begin with, and here's where we took it to, right? So you're almost sort of tapping into a way that they can show how successful they've been, or a way that they can prove that they have done good work and improved the experience overall. So I think that's really helped us from a heuristic evaluation and getting plugged in perspective.
Thanks. Just a couple more questions. Carl, you had your hand up, so you can go ahead and go next.
Sure. So I just wrapped up a boot camp, and the one thing I was most excited about learning about was questions and interviewing and stuff. And in my breakout room a few minutes ago, we were talking about how I just finished this interview with a user and I don't have any information that I wanted to get, even though I tried to write a bunch of questions that were completely relevant. Is that just a matter of practice and experience, or are there resources that can help me write better questions?
I'm happy to take a stab and then open it up for anyone else. I think it comes down to me and I've been there, believe me, to focus, like laser focus on nailing your team down to the research questions ahead of time, and not 20 research questions, but 5 or 3 research questions. These are the things we want to learn via this study. We're not throwing the kitchen sink in there. We're really concentrating on learning these 3 things, and that helps you as a researcher really focus your mod guide or your questions around getting at those 3 things, as opposed to being worried about trying to answer those 20 questions and how in the world are we going to do that and flying all over the place in interviews. So I think that focus up front is going to do you well in the end, and it's really important. And like I said, I've completely been there. You get out of sessions, you're like, I don't even know. Like it was fun to talk to this person, but I have no idea what I just learned. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's true. To Cory's follow-up, just have your goal in mind, exactly what you want to learn, and ladder your questions up to that goal. And making sure that the questions you ask are what you want to learn, which is your goal and objective. Sorry, go ahead, Anne.
No, I was just going to agree with you. Yeah, I was going to say basically the laddering approach works great. And I usually like to have 3. Well, I like the number 3 to 5. I said 3 to 5 evaluators, right? So 3 to 5 kind of big questions that you want answered, and like focus on that.
I would say that
exactly. Go ahead, Michaela. Sorry.
In my experience, the problem is that people, the team, sometimes have a hard time defining the goals. They don't know where they're going. They don't know exactly what is it that they need to know. And so what I have learned is to frame the questions in terms of what are the decisions that you need to make. And that will lead them to kind of help them to think about the goals, because then you start kind of peeling off the nice to know information from the need to know information, because there's a lot of nice to know this piece of information. What is it you're going to do with it? What type of decisions are you going to make? And that will help them. If you lather that up, talking to the team first, then it will give you a better sense for what are the goals.
Great. Okay, just thanks, Michaela. Jeff, do you want to go next? You're next in line.
Sure. Yeah, so I've got a team of pretty green UXers that I'm working with. And I've been thinking of using heuristic evaluation as a tool to help sort of like teach some of the general UX heuristics to the team. My concern is that we might start doing only heuristic evaluation and stop talking to people. What's your perspective on that?
That's
Cory? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, Cory talked about it at the very beginning is a heuristic evaluation. You don't want to use it as a replacement for talking to users. And the one thing that I do like about the right problem, right solution done right is when you start very off at the beginning with the heuristic evaluation, I a lot of times use those again to help prioritize not only with the product team, but prioritize going into a usability study. So I have an idea and a hypothesis of where those friction points are. And so when I ask my questions, of course, I can't be biased, kind of get an idea of that within the usability study. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, make sure that it's a part of the whole research plan.
Yeah, and I don't know if Cory has anything else to add.
No, I mean, it's a really good question. I like the idea of it as a teaching tool. I'm thinking back to, so I went through the grad program, the human factors grad program at Bentley, and it's one of the things that we did there. And I think it is a really good way to start to learn the principles and the sort of it bakes in the reasoning that things are happening, right? Like humans process information in a certain way. Our memory systems work in a certain way. When we don't design things to work within the constraints of the human processing system, we start to see problems, right? So I think it is a really good way to start to learn those principles. You might get in a place, I think from an organizational perspective, it is cheap, it is quick. So you'd probably want to be looking out for that. But I think some of the things you can do is start to, when you are doing user sessions, make sure that you're recording those and bringing clips and things like that forward of what your customers are actually going through. And that's like the most enticing way sometimes for people to say, oh wait, what is that? Like we need more of that, right? So really leverage the time you do have with your users. And one, I think good suggestion I have from experience is just use video clips, use quotes, things like that. And you can only get that really, really rich, great data from talking to people. You're not gonna be able to get it from doing heuristic evaluations.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Anne, did you have something else to add, or you good? Okay, sorry, I thought you. All right, so we'll just take these last two questions that have people with their hands up. So, OQ, you want to come off of mute, or you're off of mute?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had a question about heuristic evaluation. You might probably say it would work for any product, any startup, any type of business, but I wonder, is it a must-have for some kinds of like product? For example, I'm currently working at a B2B software company that is a startup, and it's a very small company. The user base is quite small, and I don't know if I can get buy-in from C-level people to say, hey, give me a week to do this. Whereas I wonder if I was working with a B2C company at a high risk kind of product, like, I don't know, something to do with medical stuff or something to do with finance, would it be easier to get buy-in to do a week of heuristic evaluation? So is there kinds of companies and products where it should definitely be a must-have and it would be easy to get the buy-in from the stakeholders? What do you think about that in general?
I used to work at a software company, and so I think heuristic evaluations can work really well in the software industry, especially when you tie it to what the user's like tasks are, and you take the evaluation based on those tasks, and kind of like showing the value of UX. I like to think of it like the laddering we talked about earlier is laddering of like doing the highest value you can do right, and then measure the value of the return on investment in the heuristic review versus, users, and like how those two work together, and then promote those results. out as you go along. And I think if you do that in kind of those steps, that might help you get the buy-in from the team to be able to do the heuristic evaluations. Cory, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Sometimes you have to figure out ways to do things even when you don't necessarily have permission to do them. So if it's, and what I mean by that, if it's something that you think is going to be very beneficial, is there a way that you can sort of MVP it? Meaning, is there a way to do it on the side for a couple weeks and put together something that you can then show to your business partners to say, hey, look, we spent some, a total, like, tally it up, of 8 hours thinking about the experience from a heuristic review standpoint. And it turns out, we're finding that there might be a lot of issues here. It might be something we want to look into. So in some cases, it's hard to gain, buy-in for a lot of things. But if you can show in any way, shape, or form that there's value there and prove it, then they're probably going to be a lot more open to it in the end. And I would say also, if there's no time to spend a week doing this stuff, are you getting the time to do any more in-depth types of research, or are they on board with that or not? Because if you don't even have time to do a week worth of the cheapest, fastest thing to do, then it's gonna, I have a hard time believing they're wanting to do any more than that either. So you might want to point out that there are problems. You can start to identify problems and needs of your customers based on doing things like this, and kind of approach it sort of inch by inch, as opposed to trying to gain buy-in for the whole thing at once.
Great, thanks, Cory. Okay, let's wrap up with one more question from Prasanthi.
Hi, so I'm currently a bootcamp student. So I want to know whether I can use this heuristic evaluation for each and every project that I'm doing, because most of the projects are fictitious projects. So can I apply this evaluation for each and every project, or it's based on the requirement?
I think, good question. So you said that they are fictitious experiences, or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
Potentially, I mean, we applied it to a fictitious case in order, for this talk. So I think you can, anytime that there's the experience needs to be digital. That's one component that has to be there. But as long as there's some form of interaction between a person doing something and the digital element, I think you can apply the heuristics. The Nielsen ones especially have been around for like 25 years and tested in a whole bunch of different ways. So they may seem a little bit outdated, but they seem to hold true for the most part across all kinds of digital experiences. So I think the answer is yes, you could apply it to anything. I can't think of an example where you wouldn't be able to, that's digital and includes human and computer interaction. So
okay, yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Well, I know it's probably late and early for some people, depending on what time zone you're in. So thank you so much for everybody who attended. Let's give Cory and Ann another round of applause or thumbs up, or and thank you all for staying on through the breakout rooms and the happy hour here. And we'll see you next month, April 13th, for Erica Hall. So everyone have a good night, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.